Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to this second chapter of this webinar series that IE University School of Architecture and Design is co-hosting with the Counselor of Real Estate. Issues such as the shift to remote working and its social impact, the ESG factors are now more relevant than ever. Economic and environmental conditions in cities, the need for affordable housing that our guests will be discussing in today's webinar has already shaken up the industry as we know it, and all require new skills and knowledge that go beyond the reach of the traditional real estate curriculum. At IE School of Architecture and Design, we have designed a master in real estate development, both in the format of blended or face-to-face, where students may stay on the latest trends, apply innovative digital tools, and have a sustainable and holistic understanding of current real estate issues, and become a strong, inspiring leaders ready to make an impact on modern cities. As part of this continuous learning, with the objective to go deeper in this hot topic in the real estate industry, we partner with the Council of Real Estate to give members of the CRE and IE community the opportunity to understand real deeper these issues. So we can start this webinar. Thanks to CRE for partnering with IE University.
Thank you, Francesco. Hello, everybody. On behalf of the Counselors of Real Estate, it is a distinct privilege to welcome you to this session of What's Next for Real Estate and the Life Experience. Today's topic, housing, rising costs, and the real estate ecosystem. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bill McCarthy, CRE, Global Chair of the Counselors of Real Estate. I'm also the President of WPJ McCarthy and Company Limited in Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada. The Counselors is a distinguished international group of accomplished leaders solving the world's great real estate challenges. Experienced, innovative, and credentialed problem solvers, counselors reside currently in 21 countries, practice in many more, and offer expertise in over 60 real estate disciplines across all asset types. Each has earned the prestigious CRE designation. We are truly honored to be partnering with IE University School of Architecture and Design in today's webinar, and we have another one next month. All topics emanate from the Counselor's 2022-23 Top 10 Issues Affecting Real Estate. I'd like to recognize our What's Next webinar series sponsors, Altus Group, Busac Real Estate, Equus Capital Partners, Avison Young, and Colliers International. Thank you sincerely for your support. You're encouraged to utilize the Q&A feature should you wish to submit a question. Your participation is welcomed and we'll answer as many questions as time allows. Before we begin, I'd like to offer you a free subscription to the Counselor's peer-reviewed professional journal, Real Estate Issues. If you don't already subscribe, please visit cre.org/REI to do so. I'm privileged to introduce today's moderator, George Vallone, CRE. George is president of Hoboken Brownstone Company in Hoboken, New Jersey, where he specializes in urban housing with a socially conscious approach to development. He has built more than 1,000 units of affordable housing and has taught courses frequently and lectures on today's topics. Welcome, George. Over to you.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. So we've got a great panel today. We've got two people. We've got Marga, who's in Spain, and we've got Paula, who's here in the U.S. Marga is I believe, more of a for sale expert, and Paula, who's with the National Association of Apartments, is definitely an expert on the rental side of the market. So we are going to get both sides of it, for sale and for rent. And I'm going to turn it over first to Marga. She's going to give you her background, and then we're going to hear from Paula, so you get a little bit more detail on her background, and then we'll dive into the presentations. So Marga, you want to start?
Thank you very much, George. Good morning or good evening. It depends on the part of the world that you are assisting today. I am in Spain, in the north of Spain, because I am in a special event related to cities. And today here is, now is evening. So my name is Margarita Chiclana. I am the director of the Global Master in Real Estate Development at IE School of Architecture and Design. Also, I am the CEO of the Unexum Real Estate Company. We are expert on urban regeneration and land development, especially focusing on housing, offices, and infrastructure. It's a pleasure to be here today with CRE and to talk about this very important topic, which is housing. At the moment, we are facing difficult times. We are coming from difficult times talking about COVID, and we are facing difficult times talking about the recession that we have ahead. So it's my pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much to IE School of Architecture and Design. Thank you very much to CRE. And please, Paula, George, go ahead.
Paula, you're up.
Thank you. Thanks, George, and thanks, Marga. I'm Paula Munger. I am here representing the counselors of real estate today and very happy to be here. And thanks to everyone for joining us. I am the Assistant Vice President of the National Apartment Association. We are the voice of the rental housing industry here in the U.S. We're a trade association, and our members span all sizes, from a very large owners of rental housing, of apartment properties, to small mom and pops who maybe only have around 10 units. We provide them with advocacy. We're located just outside Washington, D.C., so we have access to Capitol Hill and our legislators. We provide them with educational opportunities, including credentialing, and we also provide them with research, which is what I do. And we study topics that are important to our members. And right now, as Margaret was saying, we have come off a really great year for apartments. We are just starting to see some weakness with the economic uncertainty ahead of us. But we've had a lot of issues in the U.S. for a very long time dealing with affordability, a lot of that related to lack of supply. And I am actually going to share my screen and just go through a few visuals that are going to frame our conversation. Okay, I'm assuming you can see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Just a little backdrop when we talk about affordability. This is the measures that the census, the U.S. Census Bureau puts out for median rent and for median income. And you can see that rent growth has been far outpacing income growth for 2 decades. So it doesn't look like a lot, but you have rent growing 3.5-fold compared to income growing just 2.4-fold. These are data through 2021. We have seen some stronger income growth recently. However, we also have rents going up. But we do expect to see that blue line for the next release of the data, which should be within the next month or so, heading upwards again. But this will really paint a picture of how severe the housing shortage here is in the U.S. I have two bars here showing new housing units that were built. These are all housing units, not just rentals. So these would be for sale as well. Built in the 1970s versus built in the 2010s. And I've plotted that against jobs. So in the 1970s, and not quite a 1-to-1 ratio, but we had about 1.1 jobs to every new housing unit. In the 2020s, that was more like 2.6 jobs for every 1 housing units. Or if you want to flip that around, 38% of 1 unit for every new job. So in the 70s, we built 17 million units of housing. In the 2010s, we built less than 10 million, and we had far more people. We also see problems with affordability really stem from barriers to producing new supply. We saw how low that was in the 2010s. And we did a study back in 2020. We ranked 60 markets across the U.S. on how easy or how difficult it is to build specifically multifamily properties. We looked at things like approval timelines, how many different groups have to actually approve the plan, what the costs are. We looked at construction costs, land availability. How many fees are there just to build a project, and what are those fees, and how they impact building? And you can see on the vertical axis, that's the index score. And basically, the higher the score, the more difficult it is to build. And on the horizontal axis is the gap in income, the gap in median income that is required to afford the median rent in that market. And it's not a perfect correlation, but you can see by and large, anything with a high index score has affordability challenges. So places like New York, Boston, LA, San Francisco. And then you look at the other side of the spectrum, and places with low scores, pretty easy to build in a lot of cities in Texas, Dallas, Austin, easy relatively speaking. I probably have some folks from Dallas on the line who wouldn't agree. Dallas, Austin, and fairly easy to build, and you have either a very small gap in income or you don't have a gap at all, so relatively affordable. And for this research, we did interview both. It was a survey research piece. We interviewed both private sector developers and public planning folks. So we had a really nice mix of people just giving us their views on how challenging it is in their particular markets. And it's interesting when you hear from public planners who are agreeing with developers that we need to do something and we need to get these processes moving along more quickly so we can get more housing in the ground. When we can't talk about the market now without looking at what the pandemic did. And this is a chart that looks at population growth across the US. This is the top and bottom 10 for population growth. And this is based on cities that have more than 500,000 inhabitants. And when you look at the population growth, that's the horizontal axis. Rent growth is on the vertical access. We had so much demand in 2021 that was released after the pandemic that we had rents soaring. And what you see, what's most obvious about this chart is the large cities. Those are all in the bottom left quadrant. San Francisco, San Jose, New York, LA, Chicago. They actually lost population growth. Some of that's not new. New York and Chicago have been losing growth over the years. But you also see that they have lower rent growth, typically under 10%, with the exception of Honolulu, and some even negative growth. And then when you look at some of the smaller markets, this is where people fled because they were more affordable and they could work from anywhere. But you had Boise, Idaho growing by more than 3% in 1 year, which is very high population growth. They were growing they had rent growth of 35%. And several cities in Florida, you see a couple cities in Texas as well, and Provo, Utah. And what's happening with these cities now as well is they're also facing affordability problems. Still relatively affordable compared to the coastal cities, but also getting more and more challenging for moderate income people to afford. And then finally, we're just looking at millennials and Gen X in this particular slide, having less wealth than the age cohorts that came before them. This is from a survey that our Federal Reserve System puts out called the Survey of Consumer Finances. And the first time they did it was in 1989, and their most recent survey was from 2019. So this actually would not have any pandemic effects in it. We know that a lot of people saved money during the pandemic, but you can see that by and large, if you're in a 55 plus age category, you have more wealth than your age cohorts did, those same age cohorts did 30 years ago. And if you were in the 54 and under category, you have far less wealth. And this is one of the reasons why millennials and coming behind them are Gen Z are having difficulty putting together down payments for a home. There are fewer starter homes because it's so costly to build. And right now with interest rates and housing prices going up, it's really getting more and more difficult for the younger generation to purchase a home. I'm going to turn it over to Margarita.
I think you're muted, Margarita.
It's true. Sorry. Thank you very much,
Yep.
George. Thank you very much, Paula. Very interesting data, very interesting research. Focus on US, as CRE is a US organization and is worldwide, but at the moment you are talking about US market. So when we started to develop our global master in real estate development on 2019, which is a master which is with a blended methodology, which means that you can mix your professional life, your personal life with your education, and this is a key concept for the future. Housing was one of the main concerns of our preparation for the masters. Everybody knows at the moment, and also we can feeling in our neighborhoods, in our cities, that housing is a problem. It's a problem. As we are talking about data and we are a university, let me share with you my screen to talk about housing with a bit more data. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so it's important also to highlight that when we are studying in IE University, our masters of real estate development, we have four drivers that always are intertwined, all the knowledge that we are sharing with our students. Sorry, first of all, I want to say hello to all the IE community that is connected at the moment. I can see some students, some professors. Hello, thank you for coming, and of course to all of you. And when we were designing this masters, we have these four drivers. One is global vision and holistic vision of the projects. The other one is technology, innovation as a huge part of the present, but especially of the future of real estate. The third is sustainability, ESG, not only talking about environmental, but social and governance. And the fourth is cities. Always thinking in the real estate developers and investors as a city makers and city changers. And as we are thinking with this global vision, sometimes when we are talking about housing, it's not the same talking about housing in US or in Europe, even in Europe, talking about in UK, for example, or in Spain or in Greece, or even in Asia, because as I said, IE is a global university with more than I think is more than 70 different nationalities in their students, in our students. So of course, if we are talking about housing in US, or we are talking about housing in France, or in Europe, or in South America, it's also interesting for our students to talk about with global vision for Asia, for example, or Africa, or even, of course, Oceania, which is pretty present in our university. So this is a comparison of international housing systems, of the housing cost over burden rate. What happens when the all-in cost related to a housing, of the disposable income of the tenants? What is happening when the costs to have a house is more than the 40% of your disposable income, which means that as higher the cost, less the households. And this is a logic question, but it's interesting to see the data. For example, you can see on the top that Greece is excluded because it's so difficult, their economy. So, for example, you can see Spain is the big one in the middle, with a huge lowdown during the 2011 and 2012, for example, which the great crisis of 2008 impact heavily in Spain, for example. And so at the moment, we are facing a high increasing interest rates scenario around the world. In UK, is the highest since 30 years ago. And in US, it's also high, in Spain, in Europe. And this is impacting at the moment on the households. The people needs more money to afford their mortgages, and also they need more money to afford their usual living costs. So we know that usually this impacts directly on the housing market. The affordability of the household, if we are talking about affordable housing, for example, in US, or affordable housing in Europe, there are two completely different approaches. For example, I remember very well when after the 2008 crisis, Spain was very, very affected and developed, as the other European countries, bad bank to have all the failing mortgages that the country had in that moment. So when the investments, mainly the US investors, came to Spain to see the houses, to see the dwellings, to see the different real estate assets that was on the bad bank on distress, I remember that sometimes I went with them to show the assets. And when I said, let's go to see this social housing, they say, no, thank you, I don't want to see it. And I must to convince them that the social housing in Europe is completely different in their circumstances, and there's different levels of social housing that in US, for example. At the end, they know the dwellings, and they buy the dwellings in distress. But the affordable housing, at the moment, we have in Europe and globally a huge problem of affordability. We are facing this scenario of recession with high interest rates and high cost of living, especially in Europe, by the cost of energy. And the presence of the public spending on housing in Europe is key for the future. And in this graphic, you can see as much expense you have, public spending you have on housing, more social rental housing you have in your country. So this is another graphic, interesting international graphic, in which you can see, especially on your right, the different housing tenure distribution. Please look at the orange line, and for example, you can see that there is not in United States. Okay, according to this source, of course, there is in France the biggest There is not in Canada. Small amount in United Kingdom, a bit in Austria, a bit in Germany. So this is for me a thing to highlight. So rent at subsidized price maybe could be a market for the future. And then just a quick review of the importance of sustainability, about sustainable development goals and housing, talking about no poverty, talking about good health and well-being, talking about affordability and clean energy, and talking about sustainable cities and communities. So all these things are important when you are thinking in housing, when you are thinking on the public and in the private way to develop housing. So it's important to have in mind the sustainable part of the housing, which is key for the people and for the cities, for the citizens. Just to highlight also that in 2010, 3.5 billion of people, according to United Nations, live in urban areas in 2010, which means that 51.6% of the global urban population. And in 2015, the United Nations developed sustainable development goals. And we expect for the 2040, 5.7 billion of people living in urban areas, which means the 63.2% of the global urban population. And if we are looking at the predictions for 2050, more than 66%, is near 70 already, is predicted to live in the cities and urban areas. So it's an important problem to address, not only for the present, but for the future. And just to say two things related to innovation at the moment, there is different startups, not in the market yet, but founded by Adam Newman, who is one of the founders of WeWork, that think that in the future, the housing will be like an Uber. Okay, this is a trend which is in the market at the moment, just to share with you. And also there are more, another interesting startup named NAR, founded by people coming from Google, Apple, Tesla, WeWork, etc. You can see on the screen, that think that they can develop better housing, cheaper housing, and with the people and with the cities. So that's all on my side, and I hope that this helped to have a great debate. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Marga. So, Paula, I'm going to turn to you first. I'm a past state president of our Home Builders Association, and I've been in the for sale market for the first 25 years of my life. And then after the 07-08 recession, the capital markets moved very strongly into rental financing, rental construction. So we switched our model because, as a builder developer, you go where the money is. And we've been rebuilding rental apartments ever since. But as a former state president of New Jersey Home Builders Association, we're a member of the National Association of Home Builders. And we did a study a few years ago that said about 30% of the cost of a new home is due to unnecessary and duplicative regulations. And that's pretty much an astounding figure, because I think the average price of a new home in the United States right now is about $300,000. So see if you cut that price by 30% and how many more people could afford housing. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. Obviously, household formation over the last 12 years, there's been 12.3 million new households formed, but only 7 million new homes. So that leaves you a deficit of housing, of homes for sale of over 5 million units. Talk to us a little bit about what the apartment association representing the rental sector, how are you seeing the biggest challenges now for building more rental housing? Because I mean, this is pure economics. When you've got a low supply and a high demand, everybody knows what happens. The prices go up. But talk to us a little bit from a perspective of the apartment association on what you see as the barriers to getting more rental housing built and trying to meet the demand.
Yeah. So, and you're right. It's economics 101. It's supply and demand. And yet a lot of people really don't understand it, or they think it doesn't apply to housing. So I had mentioned the barriers and some of the fees, and just to give one example, and this is actually in a market where it was pretty easy to build. In Austin, there was a parkland fee. Everybody loves parks. Parks are great. But in 2016, when it was introduced, it was around $650 a unit. Developers paid that. In 2020, it had gone up to $1,500 a unit. In 2021, it was $4,500 a unit. And just this rate, this year, it went up to $6,500 a unit. Plus, there's an additional fee. And all told, it's $7,000 per unit. This is in 2022, just for one agency of the local municipality. So when you're looking at things like that, so our job, our government affairs folks, their job is to try to educate that when you have these increases in cost, you can't make a development pencil. And so if you're going to be paying $7,000 a unit just for one fee, you're going to have to raise your rent in order to get that project to pencil. So we try to bring those things to light. And also just, we are encouraged by by the White House's Housing Supply Action Plan, for example, which is really trying to reward municipalities that are getting rid of discriminatory housing policies and relaxing zoning reforms. And that's kind of, that's a little bit not exactly what you asked, but do want to mention that while there are barriers, we're seeing some hope that some of those barriers might be lifted.
Yeah, we're in New Jersey, and I hope nobody from New Jersey is on this webinar that just heard that $7,000 park fee. They'll be all over that. We don't have that one yet. But, the real issue in New Jersey, and I think this is true in many, many states, is that the approval process happens at the local level. You have to go to the local planning board if you have a compliant application, or to the local zoning board if you need variances or use changes. And who's on these boards? The people that live in the town. And the typical reaction you get is, well, we have enough, too much housing, we can't park our cars, too many kids in the school system. There's all these reasons why they want to keep it status quo. People don't like change. They don't like to see growth because typically they think it's going to have impacts on their property taxes. That's where public education is paid for in New Jersey. 50% of your property tax bill is to pay for public education. So there's a huge barrier to entry just because you've got to deal with parochial level planning as opposed to regional planning, which would be a much smarter way to do things. So, Margarita, tell us a little bit about the approval process in your market and whether or not it sounds similar to what we have to go through here. I think you're on mute again, Margarita.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Sure.
Yeah, not exactly. Thank you, George. Not exactly, because in Europe, I'm living in London, but usually my company is working in Iberia, Spain and Portugal. So it's of course we have the same problems. The life is running fast. That municipalities, that barriers, that laws, that the technician people at the councils, and in Europe, for example, talking about public transportation, we don't use the car so much. For example, and we used to live or have the utilities near home, and also, but the cities grows, and the population is growing, and the question is that the population is growing faster than the infrastructure, which means that you need people. You need, as a city, you need to give to the people a place to live, but you can't do it because you have a super slow technical problems, talking about municipalities' permits, for example, and of course, lack of infrastructure, which means that, okay, you have a huge problem of housing. Maybe you have land to allocate these people, but the time that you need to do this plot of land habitable, talking about affordability, talking about infrastructure, is too long. So we are facing seriously the retrofit of the city, because this is a thing that we can do it in Europe. Okay, to analyze the assets that we can convert from offices, even from commercial, from retail, into housing. So, of course, we have this problem, and it's a huge one because time is gold, and you need time to develop new homes or to grow the city, and also you can retrofit your city. Talking about Europe, all the cities, old buildings that must be retrofit and adapted with new technology to sustainable standards to offer better housing for the people. So more or less, yes, we have this problem, but in another way.
So two solutions that are pretty successful in New Jersey, where I've been developing for 42 years, that go right to your points, Marga, is the putting in new infrastructure when you're in an area that doesn't have infrastructure. And they have a tax relief idea. It's not an idea. It's in law right now. They can give you a pilot payment. A pilot stands for a payment in lieu of taxes. And so you've got your normal real estate taxes and whatever they are based on the current levy within each town. But in a redevelopment area where you're going to be doing large redevelopment projects, they can reduce those taxes by doing a payment in lieu of taxes. And typically one of the arguments a developer like me makes to try to get a pilot is, hey, I'm going to put in all new infrastructure under my project. I'm going to connect to the utilities. If I need to increase capacity, I can increase capacity. I'm putting new wells in one town that has a well system to increase the water supply. And then by reducing the property taxes, and that can be done over 30 years, it's essentially transferring the cost that I'm expending up front and returning it to me over 30 years. And all the other taxpayers in the town pick up a little more taxes during those 30 years because my project is not paying the full levy. But on the other hand, when that 30 years burns out and they've now got this huge development paying full taxes, it lowers everybody's taxes that are around the town. So I always try to justify a pilot as the community investing in its future. So that's one way they do it. And then the other way they'll do it is they'll do it through density bonuses. If you're going to be doing a certain amount of infrastructure work, they'll give you density bonuses to help pay for that. We're also working right now. New Jersey has a huge inventory of vacant office space and vacant retail space. And we're working on a bill right now that we call it the Stranded Assets Bill. And it's going to give those assets automatic use changes. So you're not going to have to go fight your way through a local planning board if they have a huge empty office building that you want to convert to housing. You're going to get the use change to housing automatically, and they can't stop you. These are a couple of good ideas that seem to be working in New Jersey, and I offer them as thoughts you might want to talk about in your market area. So, Paula, tell us a little bit about any thoughts or ideas that are coming into the apartment association to try to increase the willingness of towns to allow more rental housing or incentives to reduce the cost of it? I mean, I know there's things like accessory dwelling units that are getting talked about. Yeah. In one of our earlier prep calls, that there's a YIMBY law that's being considered right now. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in California, of all places, because we don't really think of California as being business or even housing friendly, but they just passed several, right? They just passed a few laws, and it sounds like what you mentioned about New Jersey, where you can, the approval process has been eased for projects that are going in zoning. Not even east. You can build multifamily development in places that are zoned for office or retail, and parking as well. Or at least, they are making it a little easier to do that. They've also removed parking requirements, and that always adds to the cost of housing. And then there's also, this is on a national level, aside from the housing supply action plan I mentioned, that plan is providing some financing where there are gaps, and is particularly geared towards manufactured housing, 2 to 4 unit properties, and small multifamily properties. So actually providing financing where normally a developer is going to have, not just going to be able to make that pencil. And the DOT, Department of Transportation here, just started an initiative that they are providing 49% financing that used to be 33% if your project is built next to a transit system. So I think these are some of the things that we're seeing that are trying to make it a little easier. And I hear just in terms of NIMBYism is really tough to beat. But if you are a developer and you get your community involved from the get-go, I think that's just key. That doesn't mean you're not going to have challenges, but at least if you do involve the community and the design and within reason, of course, and the planning, and so they know what's coming and so they can expect it, that seems to be successful for some of our members.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And what about you, Marga? How's the approval process in Spain? Is it like us? Is it at the municipal level? Does it happen at the regional level? What's the scenario there?
Yeah, it's when you see the market of the States, you from Europe, not only Spain or Portugal or UK or Italy, which are the markets that I know the most. You are always envy of you guys because you develop things super quickly. You can transform super quickly a commercial area in a housing, and I saw it on papers. And for us, Europe is Europe in general, and I'm talking about these countries: UK, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. We have a huge problems of permits, talking about time. When you are talking about a cash flow, you are talking about time to deliver the housing. The timeline is crucial. And sometimes you can't trust in your own municipality. In Spain, we have two types of, in Spain and in Europe in general, we have two types of permits. The city council permit, and sometimes when you decide to go, for example, to increase the buildability of the building, then you jump into the regional permit. And this is a bit a nightmare, honestly. You try to avoid that because it's too involved. Sometimes different politics ideas over one asset, which could be struggling. It could be very difficult to develop. And this is stop your project. So sometimes you try to avoid that thing. Sometimes it's the best way to develop your asset and you want more buildability, or you want to offer to the community more green areas. And then you need both permits, the council one and the region one. but usually is difficult, and it takes more time than the time that you expect, unfortunately.
Yeah, you make an excellent point. I want to underscore it. When I teach or give little talks about real estate finance, I always ask the question, what's the most expensive part of building high rise? And people say, oh, high rise, it must be concrete or it must be steel or maybe windows, the enclosure. And I no, wrong. I said, you know what the real most expensive cost is? The cost of capital over time.
Exactly.
Point you just made. And so time to complete, time to market is the key to the deal. If you can get a deal, I mean, I can build a high-rise building in 18 months, but if it takes me 3 years to get it approved, I'm carrying the land, I'm paying my investors their preps, and it adds up. So, all right, we are at the 45-minute mark right now. So let's take a pause and check on whether we have any questions, because I always like to make sure that we're addressing the questions of our audience. What have we done?
Thank you very much, George, and just tremendous presentations, Paula, Margarita, and George. We do have time for a few questions. One, George, you mentioned that in New Jersey, it's about 30% of the building cost or the overall pro forma is tied to government charges, levies, taxes, et cetera. Up in Canada, where I'm from, that's about 43%. So how can you, you're all lucky. How can cities and governments at all levels promote housing affordability, et cetera, when their bottom line budgets are so dependent on these various taxes, levies, and the property tax going forward?
Paula, you want to take a shot at that first?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that's when you get into public-private partnerships or using land that the government already owns for some of these developments. And we actually are seeing that's one of the things that's also included in the, I believe it's the Housing Supply Action Plan. So land properties, especially now, I mean, when you think about the office sector and you think about how much space our federal government, the General Services Administration that runs those leases has available right now. I see those types of things as prime for development where government can get involved. And like I said, you really can't, government can't do it all for sure. They've shown that. So you really do need the private sector to step in.
Marga, anything to add to that? You were nodding your head. I can see you agree with it. You want to just add anything to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely agree, Paula. I thought the same. You know, the PPP collaboration, public-private partnership is key, not only for housing, but for the whole city. In fact, I am here, as I said, in the north of Spain, in Lugo, because we received this prize coming from the government of Spain and what's the name? It's an international organization, sorry. I don't, it's UNESCO, I think. And because we are public-private partnership developing and student housing, you can see it on my LinkedIn if you want the project. But we are here because we are a PPP, and PPP is the future to help that things, to cover that gaps.
Yep. And congratulations on your award, by the way. And we're gonna end sharply at in about, what do we have, about 10 minutes, because I know you have to run up to get your award. So
Thank you.
Question.
Okay, another question. There were some slides about wealth and debt and the baby boomers, millennials, Generation X, et cetera. Interesting. We've had a few comments about, is this trend accelerated? In other words, when my generation started out and, we were poor, we were able to work through and housing was attainable. It wasn't aspirational. Are these trend lines with regards to wealth and the opportunity to get into housing markets, are they going in the real wrong direction, or is it just an inevitable trend line where you have to work yourself through different phases of your life? Small question.
Paula, you want to take a shot at that first?
Yeah, and it's funny. I think about that too. And when you're first starting out and you're renting, you have to make choices. And am I going to pay more rent and be in the middle of everything, or if I'm going to want to travel or go out, maybe I'll commute a little longer. But just talking about that, I don't think it's a trend line that's going to go on forever. I do think that this generation has been plagued by things like student debt that maybe weren't as prominent during the baby boom generation. They also were coming into the workforce, many of them right around the global financial crisis. So their incomes were stagnant for a while. We are seeing improvement in income growth here in the U.S. We saw a lot of the pandemic, just so many people saved money because they couldn't do anything else. So we certainly saw the housing market, when gangbusters essentially in 2021. And that's why we are where we are now, where the prices, I have a chart. I didn't have it in my presentation, but it's the looks at the price of renting versus the price of owning. Right now in the U.S., there's a $901 gap. That's the second highest. When the highest was last month, it was $1,000 gap. And that's because of mortgage rates and housing prices. But we are seeing cooling in the housing market for sure. And I think as those prices start to come down again, those people, the older millennials and even the mid millennials are going to be able to get into the housing market. There is a shortage, according to the National Association of Realtors, of entry-level housing. And again, it's for all the reasons we just gave, which is it's really difficult to build something that's affordable.
So just so I understand that $1,000 gap, that's the difference between owning versus renting. So it's $1,000 more a month to own versus
Correct.
To rent?
Correct. Right now. And that doesn't mean we haven't been seeing rents going up as well. But when you put mortgage rates on top of that, like the Mortgage Bankers Association, they look at payments, and the payments are up $600 this year. That's 40%. So it's really getting outsized, and that gap is widening, starting to come in because we're seeing rent levels moderate a bit. But it's a problem.
I think most people agree that home ownership is the primary way to generate wealth within a family. And so as home sale prices go up, and now mortgage rates are going up, so the cost of housing is going to go up even more. That's going to push more people into the rental market and hold them back from starting to generate that family net worth and equity, which is a direct result of the supply and demand imbalance that we spoke about all the way at the beginning of this hour. So, Margarita, I was interested in one of the slides you put up too. You said that I think there was a huge amount of people that are spending more than 40% on their income for rent. I mean, we have built several thousand units, and our underwriting, when we take an application from a tenant, we want them to be spending 30%. If it's going to be more than 30%, we're not so sure that they're a good credit risk. But where you are, it's 40%. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, the graphic shows that when the pressure of the cost of household rise to 40%, the number of households decrease radically, because the people can't afford to live on the households on their own. And talking about this Gen Z and millennial new generations, I think that they have at the moment this problem. They have it. The salaries are low, the cost of living are high, and also we have another impact, which is, on my opinion, and I know it on the university and on my own kids, it's the culture. I think these new generations, both millennials and Gen Z, have different culture. They prefer to live in another way, not to be dependent on pay a mortgage or to have a problem. They prefer to be nomad, to travel, or to live in another way. And I think also we have a problem with the salaries in the market. And it's also a universal call. Please pay more to the people.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there used to be a perception that renting was a stepping stone to owning, and it is for many people still. But there are many people who choose to rent for exactly the reasons you gave, Marga. They don't want the mortgage. They don't want to be tied down. They want to call someone up when they need something fixed. They don't want to do it themselves. So I agree. And that the generation of really, like you mentioned, it'll become like Uber. So, you can just really just renting, sharing, and maximum flexibility is what I'm trying to say.
And also these generations understand that they are trapped, because at the moment, if you have a mortgage, you pay last year 3% and this year 7%, and you are obliged to pay, which means that at the end, maybe you can't do it. And they want to avoid this type of problems.
Sorry, Margarita. We're at the top of the hour and we try to be precise, and you have to go collect an award that is certainly well-deserved. So I want to thank very much Paula, Margarita, George, and Francesco for joining us today. If the pandemic has accelerated our desire for choice about where and how we work, it has also had a similar effect about where we live and what type of housing we want and need. Housing is the issue going forward, so stay tuned for some more webinars and presentations from the counselors and IE. On-demand recordings are available for most of What Next sessions, and all registrants will receive today's recording. I hope you'll join us December 1st for our next presentation with IE University, ESG, Changing the Narrative on Investment. Look forward to details soon. Until then, on behalf of the Counselors of Real Estate and IE University, thank you very much for attending this session of What's Next for Real Estate and the Life Experience. Thank you all and have a good day.